The tentative budget.
So I would like to do, I'll start off the presentation tonight on the tentative budget. Based on the conversations that occurred at the July meeting, myself, Scott, and Kristen spent a lot of time over the last month working on finalizing the tentative budget for the board to review tonight. And those changes, once discussed tonight, will be updated to the website and be on display then until December, when I think we have a final budget. I'm sorry, September. First off, based on the discussion, I think Mr. Walsh had requested, and I think one or two other board members agreed that it would be helpful to see a 5-year budget analysis. That was included in your packet. I didn't receive any questions on it, so I'm just going to highlight the key points. Mary Ann, if you can go to the next page. But overall, over the last 5 years, I highlighted any year where, Scott and I highlighted any year where the expenditures or revenues were significantly off. With the exception of 2014, which our expenditures were off by about $1 million, our expenditure budgeting has been rather accurate, like within less than 1% accurate. I think we're doing a good job with our expenditure budgeting. In 2014, we were in the first contract negotiations under my tenure, and we had reached a memorandum of understanding to shift certified staff and non-certified staff to 24 pay periods. So originally in that budget, we had all the pay that had to be issued before that whole school year. And then we were able to spread that out with the June and August pay cycles. So that caused the 1 year of expenditures to be high. The other 3 years of revenues is where we seem to have our biggest swing. And as you can see in the highlights, a majority of that is because of tax collection and distribution in Cook County, and then state reimbursement payments. Those account for the significant amount of the revenues being off from the projected budget. So just looking back at these 5 years and looking at the revenues and expenditures, I don't see any real reason to change the way that we have been budgeting, and that was part of the discussion in July. I want to now direct your attention to the tentative budget. And we can start with the assumption pages. Scott was kind enough to go through and highlight all the changes in blue for the board. Traditionally, when we do our assumptions, we look at the projected fiscal year budget versus how the previous fiscal year's actuals came in. I did that slightly different this time, just based on the discussion that occurred in July, so you can see where we're really trying to close the gap with revenues, so that hopefully our projected, at this point, our projected deficit will come in closer to what we are projecting. So the assumptions are written based on budget versus budget, but I want the board and the community to understand that all budgeting decisions were based off of the actuals. And in some of the years, or some of the accounts where there was a significant fluctuation, we also did a 3-year historical on the actuals. We had one question that was submitted on the assumptions, and I believe that was related to the Township Treasurer, and Scott was following up on that. So Scott, you want to report out on that question?
Yes, I'm working with the treasurer to figure out exactly what was the total amount of pooled money. That's going to determine what the interest that you're going to make. I had an early projection on it that was put into the budget. I'll be following up with them to just double check, did that pooled amount increase, decrease, or where it's going to be. With the preliminary talk that I had this week, it sounds as if it probably is a slight increase. So I'm going to be following up with them on what they believe would be the estimated interest earnings.
And we can adjust that before the September budget. There were no other significant questions on the assumptions. The reason to give you an example of why I went budget to budget this year, two I'd like to really highlight: general state aid. With this new funding formula, we received $1.9 million last year. We only had $1.35 budgeted. So this tentative budget we went through, we called the state, we checked the Riverside. Scott did a lot of background on this. They're projecting that we should be around 1.913. So that was a $560,000 increase from the previous budget year, which is why I did some budget versus budget, because there were some significant changes. One other one that I thought was rather significant was special ed reimbursement, both on the federal end and on the transportation side. In the federal end, we received $215,000, and we only had $135 budgeted. So Scott and Sheila Jersis, our special ed director, went kid by kid that are outplaced or having any tuition costs related to, and tuition is reimbursed on a in the rears. Is that correct, Scott?
That is correct.
And so they went through student by student for last year and figured out a more specific projection of reimbursement from the federal government. So we're going to budget this year closer to the $215 that we received. So that was an $80,000 increase. And there was one other large increase, and I think that was, Scott, help me out, or is it the $40,000 for the age group gymnastics?
Yes, that's to be more in line with the revenue that that program generates. As the program continues to grow, we went with the 3-year average on that one. But as a reminder, though, this is an in and out account, though. So as you increase the revenue to make it more adjusted to where it actually is, you're also adjusting then the salaries that are being paid out. So we wanted to be much more closer towards the end of the year when the actuals come in to try to get a better snapshot of exactly what we have and what we're dealing with.
On the assumption side for the expenditures, again, they're highlighted in blue. We went through, and I think we received some good questions in July that made us take a closer look at how we were doing some our line items in each individual account. So we spent a lot of time on special ed. Now, those accounts have always come in at or under budget, but the way we were doing our personnel tracking document, position control document, we hadn't updated some of our aides into the correct departments. And so, yes, everybody received their pay, and yes, the total budgets were under budget, but it looked off to the public, who would say, well, you know, one special ed account came in $40,000 under budget, while another one came in $40,000 over budget. So again, some additional time was put in from Scott and Sheila to work on specifically aligning the accounts with the staff placement. In a perfect world, I'd like to take all non-certified special ed support staff and have them in one account. But in the previous years, some of the state funding came off of, you had to break your programs into
Based on
different,
positioning.
Yeah, different special ed needs. And so we are still currently budgeting under that, although it's not included in the new state funding formula. But I'd like the state to do something for 2 or 3 years before I go and cancel a practice that we've been using for 10 years. And we had received, I think, 2 or 3 key assumption questions. One was related to testing. Scott?
The testing account, the reason for the decrease in the testing account is the administration is no longer going to administer the ACT test, and then also the state is picking up the cost of the PSAT 910. So the paid service to purchase those tests that were being administered the previous year now are going down in FY19.
And as the board recalls, the state test now for high school is the SAT. And we had some inconclusive sets of data that we wanted to complete, so we were paying out of pocket to cover the last 2 years of incoming freshmen that were waiting for them to be juniors and pay for them to take an ACT. This will be the first year where all of our students have been on an SAT flow. So there was a $20,000 savings there. We had an additional question submitted.
Can I ask one question on this testing? If you don't mind, would you change the assumption the way you explained it? Because it's a little difficult to understand when it says it's an expenditures, it's testing expenditure decrease due to state funding test. That's a revenue funding. So can you
We tweaked the verbiage.
tweak the verbiage so it explains why it's actually going
Okay.
down?
Absolutely.
The next question that was submitted that was the expenditures related to our natural gas. And we used a 3-year average on this, but also Scott had called our provider twice. We have a call from April where they provided us a projection and a call in June where they provided us projection. April's projection, based on a monthly cycle, had us at 70,000, just over 70,000, and June's projection had us at 79,000. And so although we only spent 60,000 in actuals last year, maybe it was a light winter, we went with the higher projection that they sent us in June.
Makes sense.
But we did call the provider, and
Good.
Scott did have interaction with, actually twice with the provider. And then Scott, I think you had one other question on special ed, but you're going to go into that a little bit into the budget.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
You kind of addressed it a little bit with how you said that we looked at the actual positioning of all the different positions within it and tried to adjust the general ledger to match. But we'll touch on it when we get there.
Okay, I think I covered all the key questions on the expenditure assumptions. If we go to board book page 93, is it?
92 and 93.
And there was a question submitted about summer tuition. Scott, you want to address that one?
Yes. So this account here is looking at all of our summer school and all our summer camps. So for the past 3 years, we were running right around 130,000. This previous year, FY18, came in at 151, which was a little higher than normal, but we also had more campers this year. So we looked at the 3-year average and bumped it up to 139,000. Once again, trying to be a little bit more closer to the pattern on it, increasing it. And like I said, the other factor that we have to look at is sometimes we're collecting revenue from 2 different fiscal years. So depending on when we're receiving camp money, it could hit in one year or the other. So there is some swing in the actuals that will come in at the end of the year.
Page 98, we already addressed. That was the testing question. Page 100 was the special ed department. Scott, do you have a quick analysis on that?
Yeah, the biggest ones that were changed were the certified salary and the non-certified within the different special ed departments. So that's where you'll see the biggest change with it. Once again, I worked with our special ed director to make sure that the general ledger lines up with their actual positions that they have within the department. And this should not have then the major variance at the end of the year where one account could be 20 grand over and then another one is 20 grand under. So
And the
after
new
looking
accounts
at
that you established?
the new accounts that were established in this one, just for tracking purposes, is I broke out the special education office. So I took out the special ed director and put that into the special ed office, and then also took out the administrative assistant to the special ed director and moved it to that special ed office. They were previously in the learning resource department as the capture-all for special education, but when you're trying to track the actuals of admin salary, it's a lot easier to actually have that line item broken out, so that's why I did that within the special education department.
And there was a short question on 100 regarding the IDEA grant. I believe it's under special ed as well, but closer to that to the bottom.
It should be one of the last items in the 1200 function code, which is special education. There was a $35,000 budget for FY18. That has been zeroed out and has been applied to the LADSI purchase service agreement. So those IDEA dollars go to offset the cost of our purchase service that is needed within the district.
So the board understands I am, as a directing board member for LADSI, this Riverside Brookfield is one of the only high schools that participates in the LADSI Special Ed Cooperative District. It's us, LT, and then the rest are all elementary districts. And so we had a big restructuring over the last year, 2 years, that we worked with the outgoing director and the new incoming director, but a majority of the schools wanted a more of a pay-as-you-go or pay-as-you-need, so that there used to be costs that were sent to all the schools, and some schools weren't using those services, but just, it was traditionally how they broke up the administrative functions, the staffing functions for the cooperative. And so what we've done is most of those options are now paid purchase service agreements. So when you get your federal dollars from the IDEA grant, basically what they're doing now is all they're leaving in there is the professional development. So each individual school has the right to choose how they want to professionally develop their staff. The rest of the money is then applied to their purchase service agreement. And I believe we have a purchase service agreement of just over about, what, 500,000?
It's, I think a little over 600.
Okay, so all those are, it's not like we're losing money, it's just going to address an additional expenditure.
Can you help me with one clarification on the special ed, if you're still on page 100, right?
Okay.
So the new section in the it's easiest, I think, to look at the function column where it says special ed office.
Okay.
So your first 4 lines, well, really, that whole section, we're increasing it by about 190,000 because there was no budget, right?
That is correct.
And then if you go to 2 sections below where it says LR, what does it stand for?
Learning resource.
Under there, we're decreasing on the column, second column from the right by 150,000, right?
Yes, 141 and then,
Well, the net is 150.
okay,
And then under the self-contained in the second line for non-certified salaries, we're decreasing by 136. So there's a 280 decrease and a 190 increase. Do they somewhere in smaller amounts net out? Because aren't our special ed salaries going to be higher next year than they were last year? Based on some of the things we've been told with new students coming in? And maybe it's those littler pieces in between, but that's why I was asking the question. It doesn't jump out that where the debits and credits are offset.
No, I know,
each other.
but the biggest difference in the whole entire special ed, the staffing stayed the same
Oh.
as far as FTE for teachers.
Okay.
The only difference is under the non-certified, I removed one para that was not filled. There was a para that resigned in December and the job was never filled. I had it in there as a placeholder, and that is
Okay.
no longer needed for the non-certified, so that was pulled out.
Okay.
and then we changed some of our purchase service.
Yes.
Correct.
So do we expect our special ed to be higher a little bit next year, or?
Our out-of-district tuition.
Out-of-district tuition is higher.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So out of district tuition, like, we put up to like $1.2 million, right?
Yeah, it's in the assumptions, I believe,
Right.
what we're increasing that by.
And this, am I reading this right, so we're gonna spend $1,050,000 in staffing for special ed, is that, am I reading that right?
Yeah, I mean, included also in there some textbooks,
Supplies.
professional
Software.
services. But yes, a large, I would say 80% of that is on salaries. The next question is business ed, and that's on page 101, and that was the position that were unable to fill, so that staffing has been spread out through other departments and accounts for the 1.1 that Kristen had at the bottom of her chart of still open.
The .1, you mean?
Yeah, the 0.1.
So are we going to have people teach the courses that
No.
aren't certified?
No,
then?
so we had a .3 position and we weren't able to fill that, so we canceled those 3 courses.
Oh.
And then we shifted .2 of that to fine arts to give students opportunities to take electives within that department. And so then we saved a .1 for transfers.
Okay.
I'd like to direct the board to page 106. This was another question that was submitted, and I think this was a good thing. It's got to with the non-certified salaries under the assistant principal. Scott, you want to just talk about the change you made there?
Yes, included in that line item is the security officers, the SLO, the administrative assistant to the assistant principal of student affairs, and then 1 attendance clerk. Included in that figure for that number is the wage increase, and the biggest increase is the, I put the SLO into that account. In the previous year's budget, the SLO was spread around different accounts. Biggest account that it was in previous was the crossing guard account. So there was money in there that we used that was already budgeted, so we billed the SLO out of there. But for moving forward, it just seems that it fits best under the Assistant Principal of Student Affairs.
109, you had a new administrative account,
In 109, under
tech services.
Tech Services, I split the tech director out of the non-certified salaries. Here again, this is strictly for tracking purposes. On that, the non-certified salary account has the assistant tech director and the PC support specialist with their wage increases.
And then there was one other question on the bottom of that page, and I think that's where you moved the phone account.
Yes, the paid service under the internet, there is a decrease of, I believe it's around 20,000. That was moved to the operations and maintenance internet telephone account, so that everything billed to the phone and internet is under one account now, which is under operations and maintenance.
Go ahead.
Are you gonna do that spreadsheet that shows that we didn't increase our administrative cost by greater than 5%? That we have to meet that requirement?
I don't believe that we're over that. It's
We'll
only on,
we'll
it's
do this.
only
We have
on
to do this.
specific categories.
We have to do this, we'll do the spreadsheet before the September meeting though, just to make sure before you approve the budget. Because if not, there is a resolution that needs to
That
be
needs to be passed. I believe the ones that the state looks at, we're still under it.
Okay.
So on page, I'd like to just have the board briefly, I promise this will be the last thing we'll discuss with the budget till September, is on page 89. And so, a board book. This is our overall summary. And so, after all this work and all of the discussions over the last 3 months, we're still about where we were projecting. Projecting a deficit of 231,372. Now, I'm aware of we have 2 or 3 students that have transferred in that have pending IEPs that we need to look at. And so there could be some cost impact related to that. And Kristen, as she mentioned tonight, she has to see how the transfers shake out, and with our science classes, we might need to add a .1. But I would still anticipate that the deficit should be under about $300,000, which is what we originally said in June. We lowered that to July. And so we're sitting at $230,000 deficit right now. But it will become much clearer once attendance stabilizes and we go for the final budget in September. Again, we are only budgeting at 99% property tax collection. The historical data over the last 5 years has shown a collection rate of about 99.3, 99.5. So if we receive some prior year collection dollars, we get 1 additional percent that can almost flatline the deficit to a small deficit. It's about $200,000 for every 1%. So we're budgeting at 99, and I don't anticipate a big fluctuation in state aid. I still have $300,000 in there for tax refunds. Last year was a triennial. This year is not a triennial, so I'm not anticipating as many tax appeals, but there's $300 in there for that. So I would say to you, worst case scenario, $300,000 deficit. Best case scenario, under $100,000 deficit. That's all I can do is project for you. But after all of this work that we did the last month, and we've tightened up some things with actual, specific line items, the overall budget hasn't changed much.
Thanks for all the effort.
Okay?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Scott.
I'm sorry, I have a
We
question.
already developed.
I should have submitted before.
So you're gonna ask it tonight?
Well, it doesn't have to get answered tonight. Just like, if we look on, Scott, like page 87, 88, okay, you've got these percentage increases, which is great. Say 2018, expenditure 25,000, 25,071,000. That number's not the same as what you had on the initial chart on page 83.
Okay.
83. Is this the part of the 5-year summary?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. No, a great example on this. Okay, when I was pulling this data, in order to go back so many years, I have to use annual financial reports to do it. So some of the figures that are in there are AFR numbers. The reports, I mean, this, let's see, 19 and 18 are actually cash basis. And I know the problem that I had was trying to find these in the old files and then trying to be able to filter out everything. The easiest way to do it was to go to the AFR, and I was able to figure out, okay, here's the function that goes into here. Here's the stuff that goes into there. So there
Does that
will be
make-
some difference.
Does that make sense, John, or no?
No.
Okay, so in layman's terms, after, although the county treasurer's office works with us on a cash basis, and what the board sees on a monthly basis is cash basis, cash on hand, every year after June 30th, the school district has to complete an audit. So in order for Scott to go back to some of these years, he had to use the audit numbers. Well, the audit is the only place where they'll take money from other years when we receive tax collections and actually accrue them to other years. So that's why some of the numbers may look a little off. But from the cash basis account, these were pulled off of the actuals that are done from the Township Treasurer's Office on a cash basis.
So John, remember when we talked about, when we've done the audit, the general rule is revenues that come in the 60 days after the end of the fiscal year on accrual basis are treated in the prior years.
What about the expenditures?
Same.
Same thing.
Same
yeah.
thing. But it has to be, it's not just little expenditures, though. The thing is, it will
shift.
This is a bit of a deviation than if you did it on a cash.
Cash, yes, it
But if
would
you
be.
don't have the numbers, you don't have the numbers.
So
So,
we're trying to go back so many years.
So what, we remember the 5 years, what we just did in the last month. This chart that's in there, that goes all the way back to 2010.
It's on a cash basis.
We were trying to just show how we were managing expenditures over my term as superintendent. So we were trying to show when we hit spikes or increases, and we just did the major areas. We tried to lump things together, like to the high school, the administration, special education. So again, that's also just a snapshot. It doesn't really break out detail, but we wanted to show the key expenditure areas.
so the preview chart, can you summarize that for me? That's based on,
The 5-year analysis,
right,
that was physically going in and taking the cash numbers and broken down with the cash numbers and then looking at line items at the end of the year that were significantly over budget or under budget to make that difference between what was the projected amount at the beginning of the year to the ending year.
so you didn't break down percentages on this?
No.
No, it was
Are
just,
those percentages going to be close to what's on those other, in terms of
they were
increase?
like, as far as.
I don't care about the revenue, I just
Yeah.
expenditures.
The expenditures, like you said, other than the 2014, you could go in and look at each individual line item, but overall, operating expenditures, that was the only year really that stood out.
So these two will track each other?
Yes.
Okay,
We were only 74,000 off on expenditures last year.
Mhm.
okay, good. Thank you.
I'm going to throw you a curveball here.
Was that submitted? No.
No, of course, I know.
Trying to have a better night tonight, but we keep
Yeah, no,
throwing
no.
out last minute.
It's in regards to levy. And as there's been a lot of discussion talking about special ed, and we actually do levy special ed, but we levy a very small amount. And you don't have to answer tonight because I'm throwing this out of the, and could you give us a reason why we levy so little based on the fact that now we're almost running, a $2 million special ed expenditure type of scenario? And if you don't have an answer tonight, that's fair, you just come
No,
back.
it's okay.
Let's look at that.
Yeah, I would think
Let's
it's-
look
I
at
would-
that. Let's not answer on the cuff. Let's look into that, and we'll have an answer in September. That's probably a better way. Because I think we pay a lot of it out of the ed fund.
Regardless, it all filters into the ed fund.
And with the advantage, disadvantage, there may be an advantage, disadvantage, I don't know. That's why I'm throwing it here, and they just, when you get a chance to go
There
back.
isn't anymore because they took the cap off.
Okay,
So, but we'll get you an
get
official answer on it and get that to you.
And then does that lead to a bigger question? Do you do a special ed fund type of scenario? Is that allowed? I mean, I don't know. I don't want you to answer now off the cuff, just throw that, for,
Special ed.
I think I brought that up one at a time.
All right,
I was just curious.
thank you.
Okay.
Is that it with the?
That's it. Scott did a good job. Good job,
Thank you,
Scott.
thank you. Thanks for
Well
all the
done.
work, thanks for all the work on
Well
it.
done.